In this video we're going to have a look at how to approach question 4, and a lot of students see this as the nightmare question, and it's because it's worth the most marks and it's about language analysis, which a lot of students tend to struggle with. There are a lot of reasons why students tend to struggle to get marks on this question, one of them being that they don't spend enough time. As you can see, this is worth 16 marks, so you need to be spending about 24 minutes on this question. So if you've wasted time on questions 1, 2 and 3, then you're taking away time from this question, which is worth double the marks of the other, so it makes no sense logically to do that. You must protect that time to spend on this question. The second reason students don't do very well on this question is because they don't do what the question is asking. So the question is saying compare the ways in which language is used for effect in the two texts. A lot of students really struggle to get out of band 2, which is equivalent to a grade D or E, and that's because either they don't use quotes or they don't refer to language closely enough, so they can't get higher than a band 2. Once you figure out how to do this, it's actually quite an easy question to pick up a lot of marks on. So hopefully this video is going to explain exactly how to approach the question. So the other important thing to notice about this question is, first of all, it will usually name source 3 as a source that you must refer to, and then you can choose either source 1 or 2 to compare it to, and compare there again is another key part of the question. However, you must try and say more about the text that's named. The examiners haven't named that text by accident. They usually tell you to refer to that text because there's a lot that you can say about the language in that source. So in this case it's alone, and it's a descriptive piece about someone's struggle to survive in the Antarctic. So because it's descriptive and it's about something quite tense, there are a lot of language techniques used, so there's a lot to say. So make sure you say the most about this source and then choose whichever of the other two sources that you feel the most confident about writing about. Before we carry on then, I'm going to just point out some things that you definitely shouldn't do. First of all, don't write about presentational devices. This isn't question 2 anymore, it's question 4. So there's absolutely no worth in writing about the picture, the colour, anything like that. You won't get any marks for it. Second one is sentence length and punctuation. Students talk about quite intelligently about how short sentences are used for effect, but once again in the mark scheme there's absolutely no marks available for this kind of thing, so it's a waste of time. So avoid writing about sentence length and use of punctuation. And the last one is that once you try and start explaining the language, you must try and avoid using phrases that are too general, that don't really explain anything at all. Phrases such as, the writer uses a range of language features to create effects for the reader, without actually explaining what those effects are. Or, the writer uses a lot of good imagery, which creates a good effect. Or, this will make the reader want to read on. You actually might as well be saying nothing if you say these kind of things, and these kind of comments won't lift you out of band 2. So how do we actually do this in the exam? The question is asking us how language is used for effect. So to be able to comment on that, we need to find quotes that we can use in our answer from the text, because then we can explain how the language is used for effect. If you don't use quotes in this question, you're throwing away marks because you can't get marked for language analysis without referring to the text. Try and choose short quotations. One word is often the best, as it shows that you've really zoomed in closely to language and that you can analyse language at word level, which is a higher level skill. And try and embed your quotes into your answer so it just flows and it reads quite fluently. So as you're reading through the text, the first thing to do is to underline any interesting words or any language effects that are just quite blatant. Any word that makes you think, why has the writer put that word in? Why that word? Anything that's obviously there to have some effect, underline it, and then you can come back after and start thinking about what specific language technique has been used or what is the actual effect on the reader. But just go with your gut instincts first and try and pick out several words and phrases that you could talk about. So to start with, I've just underlined words that seem quite powerful. So words that show the struggle, show the emotional situation that is in, and how terrifying it was. So the first word I've underlined here is hauling. That's a a verb which shows how hard it was for him to pull the sledge in the snow. The words shot and flash show how quickly it happened, it caught him unawares. So that really emphasises that. This phrase I've underlined because it seems to be really emotive. Comrades are like people that he obviously cares about, people that he's been with all the time. And then the word perish, next to that word, just shows how they've suffered in a strong way. And then this is the end, blazed in my mind. That's metaphorical. But that word blazed, you can talk about the connotations associated with the word blazed. You think of fires, you think of suffering, you think of maybe even hell, connotations of hell. So again, if I'm aiming for the top bands, these are all the things that I could say to expand my explanation. And really, if you can think of anything perceptive and get it into your answer, then that will get you top band marks as well. So the other things students struggle with is the second aspect of the question, which is to compare how language features are used. So a mistake that they can make is try and technique spot. So they might find a metaphor in one and then look for a metaphor in the other and then panic because they can't find one, or try and find alliteration in both sources. But really that's not the best way to compare. What you should do is try and find similar effects on the reader. So for example, we've just talked about how the language in this alone text is quite urgent. So we've got words like shot and flash. You could compare that to this stark warning. That creates quite an urgent tone that something has got to be done about global warming. So about something completely different, but it's still having that same effect to like wake the reader up and make them think that something tense is happening, something urgent is happening. And then remember, you can talk about the differences as well. So whereas this text here is quite descriptive, this one is more factual. There's a lot more statistics and facts because it's got to get information across to the reader, so it does it in that way. So look for similarities if you can, but also how the texts are different, and try and make several comparative links in your answer just to show that you are actually comparing two texts. But remember, it is fine to say more about one article than the other, so the advice really is to say more about the article that's been named, because that is going to be probably easier to write about. So here's the mark scheme. This side is the same for every single question 4 that's ever in any exam, and this part's specific to the question that you've just done. So if you look here, perceptive and detailed are the key words to get the top band marks. So you've got to show a full and detailed understanding of the text in relation to language. So you don't just talk about what the texts are about without using quotes. That won't hit that bullet point. You've got to do it in relation to language. So how are the words used? What effects are created by the words that are used? Then analyse how the writers have used language to achieve their effects in different contexts. So one might be quite an article full of information, whereas the other one's more descriptive. So show that you've understood the difference in how language is used differently to achieve the effects that the writers want to achieve on the reader. Offer appropriate quotations, so short, well-chosen quotations that support your ideas with perceptive comments, using English terminology wherever you can, so using things like metaphors, similes. If you can identify semantic fields, that's a brilliant one for language analysis. Shows that you're very perceptive. So semantic fields are words that are all linked thematically. So the whole text might have several words to do with religion, for example. So if you can pick out a theme and talk about semantic fields, that's really perceptive. And then the final bullet point is the comparison part. So focuses on comparison and cross-referencing of language between the texts. Now, this part of the mark scheme just gives you some idea of what you could have talked about in your answer. Obviously, it's not exhaustive. You can say more. Anything that's intelligent and can be backed up by referring to the text will get you marks. It is just worth looking here where it says that vivid words and images should be explained and interpreted for higher marks. So there's no point just picking out a word and then not explaining it. That's not going to get you into these top band marks. And then here it says candidates may include person, tense and devices, so that's your language techniques. But again, they need to be exemplified with a quote and their effects explained for higher marks. So none of those vague, empty explanations that we talked about in the first part of the video. Make it specific to that quote that you've chosen, and really explain how it is meant to affect the reader. There are a lot of resources out there on the internet that you can use to help prepare for question 4, and I'm just going to show you some of those now. I'll put a link to where I got these from in the box below this video. So the first one that I quite like is this Exploder quotation resource. And the idea of this is that you write a short quote here in the middle of this explosion, and then all around the edge you kind of mind map all the ideas and connotations that you can think of to say about that word. It's getting you to say a lot about a little. It's got some phrases here that you can use to help you to analyse the language, and it really is a good way. This example here that I've got was about a poem, so it's not quite question 4, but it's still showing you just how you can analyse language using this. So as you can see, from just those 3 lines, I've managed to fill a whole page full of things that could be said about the words used in this quote. So it might be worth printing out a quotation sheet like this and then just practicing, find a news article, write a phrase down that you think you could say quite a bit about, look up the words in the thesaurus, Google them, and then just try and explode the quotation and say as much as you can. And then in the exam, try and picture how you did that process so that you can just think about saying more and more about the language. This slide here is really useful because it helps you to construct your answer. So when you're writing your paragraphs up, this gives you phrases and connectives that you can use. So you start off with the basics here, and then you can develop your answer using these connectives, and you can develop it even more using these connectives. So learn these before the exam, and you could even just jot them down on the side of your paper as soon as you get in there, so that you know how to structure your answer and you can keep referring back to them. And then the last one is this, because it gives you some sophisticated vocabulary to learn that will help you to explain how an author uses language in the text. So definitely revise these, make some flashcards, learn how to spell them, look up the definitions, what they mean, and then that will help you to come across as quite perceptive when you are answering question 4, and also it will help your answer to sound much more sophisticated.